I never thought I would be the one to bring down our neighborhood's self-appointed sheriff. But life has a way of putting you exactly where you need to be, even when you have no idea it is happening. After years of saving every extra penny, countless weekends spent touring houses that never quite felt right, and more than a few heartbreaking near misses, I finally found it, my perfect first home. A modest three-bedroom with mature oak trees that lined the street and cast dappled shadows across the newly renovated kitchen. The moment I walked through the front door, something just clicked. This was the place where I could finally put down roots after years of non-stop work and travel. I have always been career-focused, often spending weeks on the road for my job, living out of hotels and returning to a sterile apartment that never really felt like home. Finding this house in this quiet suburban neighborhood felt like finally turning a corner in my life. The homes were well-maintained, neighbors waved as I toured the property, and there was a sense of pride that seemed to permeate the community. Yes, there was an HOA, but my realtor assured me it was primarily focused on maintaining property values and organizing community events. As someone who travels frequently, I actually appreciated knowing there would be some basic standards maintained. The house checked all my must-have boxes, especially the spacious two-car garage with a wide driveway that could easily accommodate my work van. I need that van for my job. It is nothing flashy, just a commercial vehicle with modest company logos on the doors. During the purchasing process, I meticulously reviewed all the HOA regulations, specifically confirming that commercial vehicles were permitted on private property. I even got written confirmation from the HOA board before closing. I did my due diligence, I always do. My sister helped me move in. She is a detective with the local police department and has always been my rock. As we unpacked boxes that first weekend, she jokingly warned me about HOAs sometimes attracting power-hungry personalities who could not cut it as real cops. I laughed it off. Surely that was an exaggeration. Those first few weeks were everything I had hoped for. Neighbors brought over cookies and potted plants. An elderly couple across the street invited me for Sunday dinner. The family next door helped me set up my patio furniture. I attended my first monthly HOA meeting, eager to be an engaged resident, and that is when I first noticed him, Gerald Thompson. Gerald stood out immediately in what I can only describe as a security-style uniform, complete with badges and patches I did not recognize. He introduced himself as the HOA compliance officer and spoke with unusual authority about various enforcement matters. Something about his demeanor made me uneasy, but I dismissed it. Every community has its characters, right? I returned home from a 3-day work trip the following week to find a printed violation notice tucked into my door frame. According to this official-looking document, my work van, which had been parked in my driveway for exactly 2 days, was in violation of community standards. Confused, I immediately emailed the HOA president, attaching the written confirmation I had received before purchasing. The president responded quickly with an apology, confirming that commercial vehicles were indeed permitted on private driveways according to the current bylaws. He mentioned, almost as an aside, that Gerald had been pushing for a rule change regarding this issue for some time, but no such change had been approved. He assured me I could disregard the notice. Relief was short-lived. Over the next few weeks, I began noticing a black SUV with magnetic door signs reading HOA Security Patrol frequently driving past my house, slowing noticeably as it passed. Several times, I spotted Gerald standing across the street, photographing my property. Once, when I stepped outside to ask if there was a problem, he quickly returned to his vehicle and drove away. My discomfort grew. A friendly neighbor mentioned casually that Gerald was a retired mall security supervisor who had unsuccessfully applied to the police academy multiple times in his younger years. "He takes the HOA stuff really seriously," she said with a meaningful look. "Most of us just try to stay off his radar." During a neighborhood block party, I made a point of introducing myself directly to Gerald, hoping to establish a more amicable relationship. His handshake was limp, his smile never reaching his eyes as he looked me up and down. "Some people need to learn to follow rules if they want to be part of a quality community," he said before turning away to speak with someone else. The message was clear. I was not welcome, despite having broken no actual regulations. When my sister visited the following weekend, I shared my growing concerns. Her expression changed immediately when I described Gerald's uniform and self-appointed title. "That is not okay," she said firmly. "Impersonating law enforcement is taken very seriously. Does he carry anything that looks like a badge? Does he imply he has authority to enforce laws?" "I do not think so," I replied uncertainly. "It is more about HOA rules, not actual laws." "Still, document everything from now on," she advised. "Take photos if he is surveilling your property, save any notices he leaves, record dates and times of any interactions. If nothing else, you will have evidence for the HOA board that he is harassing you." I followed her advice, starting a digital folder documenting Gerald's strange fixation with my property. I hoped it would never amount to anything serious, just an overzealous neighbor with too much time on his hands. I was wrong. The breaking point came after a particularly exhausting work week. My flight had been delayed twice, and I finally pulled onto my street around 11 p.m. on a Friday, desperate for a shower and my own bed. But as I approached my house, I realized with growing disbelief that I could not access my driveway. Gerald's black SUV with its HOA security patrol magnets was parked directly across it, completely blocking my access. Assuming there must be some emergency or water main break I was unaware of, I parked temporarily on the street and approached my front door, only to find another notice taped prominently to it. This one stated my work van, which had been safely parked inside my closed garage during my entire week-long absence, was in violation and under official community review. Exhausted but now thoroughly angry, I called the number listed on the notice. Gerald answered on the second ring, sounding far too alert for the late hour. "This is Gerald Thompson, HOA Compliance Officer," he announced with evident satisfaction. "How may I assist you?" "You can start by moving your vehicle from my driveway," I said, fighting to keep my voice level. "I just got home and I cannot access my garage." "Ah, yes," he replied. "As I explained in the notice, your property is currently under investigation for persistent violations. As HOA Compliance Officer, I have the authority to restrict access until the review is complete." "That is absolutely not true," I countered. "There is nothing in the HOA bylaws that gives you or anyone else the right to block my driveway. I need you to move your vehicle immediately." His tone turned condescending. "I understand you are new to the community and perhaps do not fully understand how things work here. I will be completing my inspection in the morning, at which point I will move my vehicle. Consider yourself fortunate. I could have had the vehicle towed, but am being lenient given your recent arrival." "This is my property, Gerald. You have no legal right." "I have every right as the community officer," he interrupted. "Further arguments will only extend the review period. Good night." He hung up. I stood in my front yard, phone in hand, completely stunned. This had moved beyond petty harassment into something that felt significantly more troubling. I tried calling the HOA president's emergency number, but it went straight to voicemail. After a moment's hesitation, I called my sister. "I am not sure if this constitutes a police matter," I explained after outlining the situation, "but I do not know what else to do." Her response was immediate. "Stay there, do not engage with him again, I am coming over." While waiting for her arrival, I noticed several neighbors had come outside, observing the situation from their porches and driveways. They were clearly aware something unusual was happening, but maintained their distance, watching, waiting, silent. My sister arrived 20 minutes later in her personal vehicle, dressed in jeans and a sweatshirt. She was off duty, but her demeanor shifted into professional mode as she assessed the situation. She approached Gerald's SUV, confirmed it was empty, then returned to where I stood. "I am going to call him," she said. "As a police officer, not as your sister, this crosses several lines." When Gerald arrived 10 minutes later, he walked with the exaggerated swagger of someone playing a role. My sister met him halfway up the driveway, immediately identifying herself as Detective Williams with the local police department. displaying her badge and ID. "Sir, you need to move your vehicle immediately. You have no legal authority to block access to a private residence," she stated firmly. What happened next left both of us momentarily speechless. Gerald pulled out what appeared to be a badge of his own, holding it up with authority. "I understand your concern, officer, but I am acting in my capacity as HOA compliance officer," he declared. "This is community property governed by our covenant, which gives me authority in these matters. My jurisdiction in HOA compliance issues actually supersedes general police authority for internal community regulations." My sister's entire demeanor changed in an instant. Her casual stance disappeared, replaced by the alert posture I recognized from the few times I had seen her in full professional mode. "Sir, please hand me that badge," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. Gerald hesitated, suddenly seeming to realize he might have miscalculated. "This is my official identification as—" "Sir, impersonating a law enforcement officer is a felony offense," my sister interrupted, her voice deadly calm. "I need you to remain here while I call for on-duty officers. Please hand me the badge now." Gerald's confidence visibly crumbled. "You have misunderstood. I never claimed to be police. This simply identifies me as security for the community." My sister was already on her phone, calling for patrol units while maintaining unwavering eye contact with Gerald. "Remain where you are, sir. Attempting to leave will only complicate your situation." Gerald's face had drained of color as the reality of his predicament began to sink in. "This is a misunderstanding," he insisted, his voice losing its authoritative tone. "I am just enforcing the community guidelines. The HOA board authorized me to—" "We will sort all of that out when my colleagues arrive," my sister interrupted. "For now, I need you to step away from your vehicle and keep your hands visible." The patrol cars arrived with remarkable speed. 2 units, lights flashing but sirens silent in the Lay Tower neighborhood. The responding officers approached with professional caution, my sister briefly explaining the situation before they took over. I watched as one officer examined Gerald's badge with growing concern, then showed it to his partner. "This appears to be a novelty security officer badge purchased online," he explained to us. "But it has been modified with additional engravings to resemble official police identification." Their thorough inspection of Gerald's vehicle revealed more concerning items. A spotlight mounted on the driver's side, a non-regulation flashing yellow light bar that could easily be mistaken for official emergency lights in the dark, and a modified police scanner. Each discovery deepened the officer's concern. As this was unfolding, neighbors had begun to emerge from their homes in greater numbers, no longer content to watch from a distance. One woman approached the officers, explaining that Gerald had once pulled her over within the neighborhood using his flashing lights, claiming authority to issue community citations for walking her dog without a leash. Another resident described how Gerald had demanded to see his identification before allowing him to access the community pool, despite having lived there for years. A pattern of behavior quickly emerged from these statements, one that crossed well beyond overzealous HOA enforcement into potentially criminal impersonation. After collecting statements and evidence, the officers made their decision. I watched in a state of surreal detachment as Gerald Thompson, self-appointed HOA compliance officer, was handcuffed and placed under arrest for impersonation of a law enforcement officer and unlawful detention. His transformation was complete as he was led to the patrol car, from strutting authority figure to sobbing middle-aged man, protesting that he was just enforcing the rules and keeping the community safe. As the patrol car pulled away, the gathered neighbors erupted into hushed conversations, processing what they had just witnessed. An officer moved Gerald's SUV, finally clearing my driveway. As the crowd slowly dispersed and the officers completed their reports, I finally entered my home. The sanctuary I had been desperately looking forward to all day now feeling strange and exposed after becoming the center of such a public spectacle. My phone began chiming with texts before I had even closed the door, neighbors reaching out, some apologizing for not speaking up sooner about Gerald's behavior, others expressing shock at what had unfolded. The community had been jolted awake, literally and figuratively. The following morning, I received a hand-delivered letter of apology from the HOA president, expressing shock at Gerald's actions and assuring me he had been acting without any official authorization from the board. An emergency HOA meeting was scheduled for Monday evening, and despite my exhaustion and lingering discomfort with the attention, I felt responsible for seeing this through to resolution. That Monday meeting was unlike any HOA gathering I had ever heard of. The community center was packed to capacity, with nearly every household represented. The tension was palpable as the board members took their seats at the front table, looking appropriately solemn. The president opened with a formal apology to the entire community. Gerald, he explained, had been an elected board member with a legitimate role on the Architectural Review Committee, but he had greatly exceeded his authority. The uniform, the vehicle markings, the fabricated citations, all had been created without board knowledge or approval, though Gerald had been using unauthorized letterhead and presenting himself as having enforcement powers. What happened next surprised me. Resident after resident stood to share their own experiences with Gerald, stories of intimidation, excessive scrutiny, and confrontational encounters where he had implied special authority due to previous law enforcement experience that we now learned was entirely fabricated. Some had been targeted over minor issues like garbage cans left out too long, others for unapproved garden ornaments or parking temporarily on the street. The common thread becoming increasingly clear was collective silence. Each person had assumed Gerald was acting with official capacity, that perhaps they were the only ones experiencing his extreme approach, or that challenging him wasn't worth the conflict it would create. Together, the community had enabled his behavior through their reluctance to question someone who projected authority so convincingly. The board took immediate action, formally removing Gerald from his position, initiating a complete review of all compliance actions taken during his tenure, and establishing new transparency requirements for all HOA communications. Any future notifications would require board review and multiple signatures, preventing any single individual from acting unilaterally. As I listened to my neighbors speak, my feelings were mixed. There was vindication in knowing I hadn't been singled out as initially feared, but also concern about the community dynamics that had allowed such behavior to flourish unchecked. Most surprising was how this uncomfortable circumstance had created stronger connections with my neighbors than months of normal residency had developed. After the meeting, people approached me individually to express support and share their own experiences, conversations extending long into the evening. The legal aftermath unfolded over the following months. I was contacted by the district attorney's office to provide a formal statement, learning that the charges against Gerald were being taken quite seriously. My sister explained professionally that impersonation cases involving actual detention of citizens typically result in significant consequences rather than warnings or minor penalties. Through the legal proceedings, I learned more about Gerald's background. This wasn't his first time overstepping boundaries. There had been similar complaints in previous communities where he had lived, though none had resulted in charges. His pattern was consistent: gain legitimate authority through proper channels, then gradually expand that role, moving from enforcement of actual rules to creating new regulations and claiming broader powers than he possessed. The incremental nature of this escalation had allowed his behavior to worsen over time without triggering immediate intervention. Gerald eventually accepted a plea agreement, resulting in probation, community service, psychological evaluation, and a restraining order preventing him from entering the neighborhood except to sell his property, which he listed immediately. I had complex feelings about this resolution. There was satisfaction that there were meaningful consequences for his actions, but also an unexpected sympathy for someone whose apparent need for authority and recognition had led to such public humiliation and legal troubles. The experience connected me with advocacy groups focused on HOA reform and homeowners' rights. I found myself providing testimony at local government hearings, considering enhanced oversight of homeowners associations and clearer limitations on their enforcement powers. What had begun as a personal conflict evolved into engagement with broader issues of community governance and the necessary balance between collective rules and individual rights. The most significant outcome, however, was the transformation within our own community. The HOA underwent a complete restructuring, with new procedures ensuring transparency and appropriate limitations on authority. The newly elected board committed to serving as community facilitators rather than enforcers, and together we developed clearer bylaws that preserved necessary standards while eliminating subjective or overly restrictive regulations. My background in project management led to my reluctant but eventually rewarding acceptance of a position on the new Architectural Review Committee. I helped establish objective criteria and respectful communication protocols that focused on collaborative problem-solving rather than punitive enforcement. Community gatherings transformed from sparsely attended obligatory meetings to well-supported social events that built genuine connections between neighbors. The incident sparked broader discussions about community values and expectations. Residents became more actively engaged in decisions about shared spaces and resource allocation. An underused common area was converted into a thriving community garden. We established a more inclusive community watch program with appropriate training and oversight. Regular social events brought together residents across age groups and backgrounds who might otherwise never have connected. On a personal level, my relationship with my home and neighborhood fundamentally changed. What had started as simply a financial investment and place to rest between work trips became a genuine community where I felt known and valued. I developed real friendships with neighbors who had similarly felt intimidated, but now felt empowered to be more active community participants. My sister became a welcome regular at neighborhood events, offering informal guidance on community safety and building positive relationships between residents and local law enforcement. Our neighborhood developed a reputation for its engaged and collaborative approach to governance, even being featured in a local news segment about effective community organization. I found myself more invested in local civic matters beyond just our HOA, attending municipal meetings and becoming more informed about local governance issues. I realized that healthy communities require active participation and a willingness to speak up when witnessing overreach or inappropriate behavior, rather than assuming someone else will address problems. My once controversial work van has become something of a neighborhood joke, with friendly teasing about whether it meets community standards during social gatherings. There is a pleasant irony in now feeling truly at home in a place where I initially felt targeted, and I have deep appreciation for neighbors who transformed from silent observers to supportive community members. At our most recent neighborhood block party, I watched as new residents were welcomed with orientation packets that include not only community guidelines, but also a clear explanation of the HOA's limited enforcement powers and residents' rights, a direct result of the lessons learned from Gerald's overreach. As I looked around at children playing, adults chatting comfortably, and former strangers now greeting each other as friends, I realized that sometimes it takes an unmistakable example of how things should not work to build consensus around how they should. What began with a power-hungry man blocking my driveway ended with a community finding its voice and its values. We learned that authority requires legitimacy, that rules should serve residents rather than control them, and that genuine community safety comes not from badges and uniforms, but from neighbors who know and look out for each other. I never planned to be the catalyst for community transformation. I just wanted to park my van in peace. But life has a way of putting you exactly where you need to be, even when you have no idea it is happening.